Welcome to Mindshift. I'm Brandon. Today's Tuesday Takedown is going to be a bit different. I hope you'll bear with me because it's going to be more personal and anecdotal than usual. Instead of reacting to what an apologist or a pastor or preacher has said, I'm going to be reacting to an event that happened in my childhood, or I should say when I was in high school at a youth event. And aside from my own cathartic reasons for doing so, I think the biggest benefit I see here is just what helped me so much when I was deconstructing, when I was deconverting. Yes, it was wonderful to understand the Bible better. Yes, it was wonderful to get into some of the philosophical arguments for and against God or this particular God. It was great to understand the contradictions and my cognitive bias and the psychology that goes into it. But one of the things that helped me the most, just personally, is hearing someone else's experiences, hearing what they went through, getting a chance, a moment to objectively say, oh yeah, that happened to me too. I've never thought about it like that. I've never seen it from that angle. I didn't realize that's what had happened. And that still happens to me, even in my position now, all the time. In fact, this memory alone is something that was so common to me that even throughout all of my own deconstruction and deconverting, I had never really thought of it. I kind of just remembered it the other day and I thought, wow, that's crazy that that happened. And I want to share it with you today. It's not a huge story. It's not life-changing. I don't even know how many of you can relate, but I'd like to start sharing more because I have so many, unfortunately, of these personal stories to just help normalize what so many of us went through, and maybe to help you also, if you need it, to be able to vocalize some of these things a bit better as well, because it is such a process. We can shove and stuff so much stuff down or think it's regular or think it's not harmful or weird or abusive or any of the things that we can get into when they so obviously are. So especially if you're doubting or you're in the process of deconstructing or figuring out what you believe and why, I'd like to give some personal examples. So let me just do one story for today, pretty quick here. And my encouragement is going to be for your participation. Please, if you had anything like this, especially in high school, let me know. And for those of you that care, you're going to get an inside look into young Brandon. So here we go. I am 15 years old. It is the early 2000s. I go to a very large high school, 3,600 people total. My graduating class had like 800 people. I'm a freshman. This is very new to me, very different. I went to a private school from preschool to 8th grade with the same like 70 kids. And now all of a sudden, bam, there's 800 other freshmen with me. And because of my upbringing, I am really only interested in finding other believers and Christians to associate with. And some of the people from my first school came here, but not too many. So I'm out, I'm making friends, I'm joining youth groups. And for the first time, I'm going to a new church other than the one that I was kind of raised in. And it is a CMA church that is huge in our area. It served 3,000 people at that time, maybe more. And there's this one night, and it's something we would do every single Sunday. It got established really well. There's this very wealthy family with a huge home, a huge yard that would invite all the youth groups from this school over to be able to have their Bible study night. And so sometimes we would all just worship together. Sometimes we all just played games, really corny youth group games. Sometimes we would break out into boys and girls or age groups, but always to cover all of the same youth group stuff, whether it was sex or drugs or how to be a shining light in a public place, all of that stuff. But tonight's message was going to be a bit different. Now, I think one of the reasons, again, just giving you probably too much information, I remember this night so well, is because I had just told that Friday this girl that I liked her in my high school. She went to this church, which is probably the main reason I was going to this particular church. We went to a Battle of the Bands that Friday night together. I told her I liked her. We hadn't been able to talk since. It's Sunday night. We are seeing each other for the first time. I'm nervous. I'm very excited. And so I'm trying to impress her during some of the games. We have this huge, crazy soccer match outside. A lightning storm comes and everyone comes inside and we start the message early. So I'm sitting next to her. I'm pretty preoccupied. But all of a sudden, our youth group pastor gets up and he says, I have something very special for you tonight. Something very different. I have a really important friend in my life that sees things pretty different than I do, and I want you guys to have a chance to talk to him. And so he introduces us to this 40-year-old, who knows, seemed so old, 40-year-old man who came and sat on a stool in the middle of 150 kids. I mean, just this place was massive, and we were packed in like sardines, sitting cross-legged on the floor, and he's sitting on the stool above all of us. And he says, the first thing I want to do, and he gets really serious, He says, the first thing I want to do, I want to play a song for you. I want you guys to understand something from my angle. And he plays the song Drift and Die by Puddle of Mudd. And we all sit there and listen to this secular music in this otherwise very Christian environment. So it's already very strange because so many of us were just so sheltered. And I loved music. I adored music from as early as possible, and I listened to everything. It was the one sin that really had me, was listening to every kind of music. I loved it. So I already knew this song very well, but I pulled up some of the lyrics to share with you so you can understand the point he was trying to make. But some of the lyrics are, I believe in the truth from inside. Go away, go away, go away from me. Leave me alone. The ignorance spreads lies. How much will money buy? Well, I'll take my time as I drift and die. After the song ends, and again, he's so serious, he says, this is how I view the world. I don't believe like all of you. Your pastor brought me here today to have me tell you my story and to see what you guys have to say about it. And he proceeds to tell us this story about a life of drugs and addiction and harm and abuse. And he brings it back to the song every so often about the ignorance that spreads lies and who's to blame for my mistakes, another lyric from the song, and goes on to talk about how he can't believe there's a God because his life has been too hard. He's been too hurt. No good God would do this. And, he's shocking so many of us who have never even thought like this before, never even considered that God could be bad, that God could not love someone, that God doesn't have a plan for someone. It was a really risky move from the church leadership. And at the time, I remember thinking, this is pretty cool. And then after he gets done sharing this atheist testimony about how much he hates God, but doesn't believe in God. And I started to even think then like, wait a second, but I'm bought in at this point. I'm really listening. And after kind of a short Q&A where we hear more about how horrible his life is and how awful God was to him, and that's why he doesn't believe, and his personal hurt, all of these things, then the main youth group pastor comes and says, why don't you guys share your story with him? I've shared mine with him. He doesn't want to hear it from me, but maybe one of you can get through to him. And so what this is a training ground, looking back, for all of us to boldly share our faith, to have a conversation with a strange middle-aged man from, there's girls in this room that are 14, 15 years old that are trying to tell this man that his hurts don't matter because God has a plan, and they know with all of their wisdom from the last 14 years what God is really thinking, what God is really doing. And we all went around the room. I remember, I felt like I was a pretty smart kid. I was pretty good at arguing. And I asked him some questions that I thought were real gotchas. And again, I had never been exposed to like the atheist world or debates or anything like this. And so I found myself saying things that, looking back, it's just embarrassing. I think I mainly made a case for her believing based off emotion and for how awful hell would be. And I remember being so convinced and convicted and thinking, how can this man be so lost? How can he not see? How could he want to even wrestle with a God who could put him in hell? Why is he risking this? If he's really lost, if he's really hurt, doesn't he know the only place to go is to go to God? And I'm sorry here because I'm trying to remember the correct order of things. As more people went and tried to convince him, which is just what it turned into, you're wrong because of this, or what about this, or aren't you afraid of this? His answers that he was giving were straw men. And here's what I mean. We find out at the end of the night that he's a believer, that he's a best friend of this youth group leader, and that this is something they like to do, and that they wanted to kind of test us on how we would react to a non-believer, the kind of things we would say, how to sharpen our faith. This is clearly an exercise to get us to do a few things. I want to really break this down. First, to make us little evangelizers. Here's how you talk to someone. Here's how you convince someone. Here's how you share the good news of Jesus Christ. It was also at the same time, and I've seen this more clearly because I could even see then that this was kind of training. They tricked us for the purpose of training us. Haha, wasn't that neat? Wasn't that edgy? But really what it was is this man who was portraying this atheist was showing us how stupid atheists were, how stubborn they were, how inconsistent they were to hate God and thus not believe. To want to go sin, which he was sure to point to, that he had a girlfriend that he loved and, he wanted to be with her, but your Bible says I can't be with her, unless we get married, and I don't believe in marriage, right? Like so many things I can remember that he said or did were just to show us, whether he believed this to be the case about atheists or not, but it was a caricature of an atheist. It was the worst one possible. It was one of stupidity, fear, a desire to sin, self-centeredness, and stubbornness. That's how they depicted the atheist to all of us believers. So we could all sit there and pat each other on the back and say, wow, we did a good job. Wow, we know so much more than these dumb atheists if this is all they have. I can't believe anyone. And that's kind of the message that was followed up at the end. The pastors come out and they say, I know it's hard to believe, but there are people like this. There's tons of people like this. People that are so lost. People at your school who think like this, who hate your God. People at your school who are going to burn in hell. People in your school who are going to make fun of Jesus and make fun of you and persecute you, maybe even hurt you, get in your way, try to deceive you, try to tear you away from the good thing you have, from the real truth that you know. And it was this insane fiction. The whole thing was made up. What actually would have been cool is if that pastor had actually been the kind of person who associated outside of his belief group, actually knew an atheist, a real atheist, someone that could communicate from the other side respectably, realistically, for us to understand, comparative religion, or the fact that not everyone thinks like we do. And we, maybe need to prepare ourselves to be, especially in a public school, which many of us in this particular group were, to be in a position to know how to stand up for ourselves and our beliefs. There'd still be some problems there, but it would be so much better. But this skit, this fiction was so heavy-handed. And again, I'm sure that this is written down in some youth group manual of, hey, if you ever need an exercise, do this. And they really tried to sell it. Again, I think bringing in Puddle of Mud was a really special detail, right? What do they say? The key to a good lie is one perfect detail or something like that. It was the Puddle of Mud song. But as I've thought about that experience more and more over the last few days, as it kind of came back to my mind, I saw the manipulation. I saw the unfairness. I saw the ignorance. He had all these straw men. He wrote this script out. He had the questions answered in a certain way. Like, let me try to give you a better example. Someone might raise their hand against this man and say, like, the argument from design, but look at the world. Like, there's no way this is just an accident, 15-year-old reasoning. And the atheist, the pretend atheist answer was, so what, right? Like, not, oh, well, I don't know. I mean, yeah, maybe that could be what happened, but I don't think we have good evidence for that. I think we have a lot of natural processes that we have good evidence for that might say otherwise, or at least take out the need for this particular creator. It was, so what? You think that matters to me? If this God is real, he doesn't care about me anyways, right? They bring it back to that denial, that emotion. And at the time, guys, again, I'd like to tell you that 15-year-old Brandon was more advanced in this. It was highly effective to me. I remember thinking, this is so frustrating. This guy is so stubborn. How can he not see the light? And what it did is it deepened my faith to hear someone be so lazy and lousy with theirs. They didn't want us to think there was a good reason to not believe. They didn't want us to think there was any real issues with the word. And that's another one that he would say. He brought up the fact that when I read the Bible, it just doesn't make sense to me. That's how he said it, right? As opposed to, well, when I read the Bible, I see a lot of inconsistencies or contradictions. And what it really helped me to understand is that the character of God that we typically are preached about and think of is maybe not who the Bible represents, right? Like nothing that coherent. It was just, it doesn't make sense to me. This thing is old. This thing, no one can understand. These laws are so silly, right? And so then our response is, oh, you just don't have enough faith. Oh, you haven't spent enough time in the Word. You need to get yourself involved in church. There are people who God is speaking through that can help us understand this. You need the Holy Spirit, right? They were conditioning us to fight these own doubts in ourselves later by showing how poor the argument was in the first place. Again, brilliant plan from the youth group, but incredibly manipulative, deceitful, wrong, and more than anything, and of course we all say this about apologetics all the time, if God is the truth, the light, perfect love, peace, justice, and his word is correct and is useful for everyone, for all time, forever, we don't need any of this. We don't need all this drama. We don't need these skits. You shouldn't have to teach a 15-year-old purposeful misinformation and misrepresent what is really going on in people's hearts and minds just to get them to stick with the religion a few years longer. But it was stuff like this, in addition with about 1,000 other things and a multifaceted shotgun approach of being inclusive in a community and not disappointing your God and that special feeling you got during worship and what your emotional devotional told you this morning. The girl you like is in it. This is what your mom and sister believe and have been telling you. This is what the last church said too. Oh, look at this congruence, but I won't worry about the things that aren't matching up or the difference in how they interpret the gifts of the Holy Spirit. Who cares about that? Like, the truth is here, and it just comes at you from 1,000 different angles, and it insulates you from anyone that might think or say differently. And it's so funny because they tried to convince you that the rest of this public school, everyone who's not here tonight for the most part is, not a devout believer, and then the rest of them are unbelievers, and you're going to go to that school and the battle will be on tomorrow. Monday morning, you're going to go and there's going to be kids doing drugs. There's going to be kids that just had sex with each other. There's going to be kids that try to get you to leave your God. And it's like, no, everyone was so kind. I know people have a hard time in high school, and I went through a few things myself, but kids are generally pretty decent, and they're generally pretty open-minded with each other. I went to school at a time where you had the goths and you had emo and you had the nerds and you had the kids that were involved in all the AP classes and you had the alt kids and this big pocket of Christian kids, and we all really respected each other. We all went to football games together and dances together, and no one ever tried to tell me my God wasn't real. No one ever tried to tell me Jesus was stupid. All of the things that this youth group kept trying to prepare me for, this persecution that was going to come upon me, didn't happen. In fact, true story, the only people that tried to get me to have premarital sex or do drugs with them or binge drink with them were other Christians that had gone to my same private school that I was now hanging out with in high school. Any of my secular friends that I made that didn't go to church on Sunday or anything like that, they just respected it. I said, hey, I'm a Christian, I don't do that. And they said, cool, man, no worries. But the Christians who started giving in and doing that kind of stuff, they were the worst. They were the ones who were like, it's fine. And then we'd go to Sunday service the next day together. And I'm not saying that all non-believers were great and all the Christians were terrible. My anecdotal experience is that the things I was warned about predominantly happened from the Christian community and not the secular community. That's all I'm saying. Again, I'm probably dragging this on longer than it needs to go. Can any of you relate? Did any of you have any of this faux atheism stuff shoved at you from your high school youth group? Is it something to laugh off and think how funny and silly? And, these youth leaders were probably not very old themselves at the time and they were doing the best they can. And, they just wanted to prepare us for the real world or what they thought was the real world. Or at what point do we say, man, whether it's the system giving this power over to these young leaders to do these kinds of things, even if what they believed happened to be true, would this be a correct way to go about it? Should we be dividing people into categories like this and showing one to be so wrong and evil and stupid and stubborn while making ourselves the victor? Should we manipulate people's emotions like this through song and story and just even a power dynamic at play? Again, you have a 40-year-old middle-aged man sitting in the middle of a bunch of 14 to 16-year-olds essentially saying all kinds of stuff, right? Because again, I think part of the goal was to scare us away from the secular. He was a bad man, and bad men looked and acted like this. And then as soon as he was a Christian again, no more swearing all of a sudden. As soon as he was a Christian again, he had to talk about how Puddle of Mudd is actually not a good band and we shouldn't be filling our head with this. And the stuff that goes in is the stuff that comes out, right? Like this total shift to make sure that we knew how inappropriate and downright sinful this version of a lifestyle is. I think it's one of the most disgusting things looking back. And I know that I smile and I laugh a little bit as I recount it from the sheer insanity of it. Also from the nostalgia of it, because despite all the horrendous church things that went on, that was still a great group of kids that I spent a lot of my life with that I really enjoyed and some that I'm still friends with today. And we hung out and we had a great time. And that's the power of these young communities, is when everything else is so good, right? Like boundaries are healthy. And encouraging people to stay away from things that can be harmful to your development or your future. There's nothing wrong with that. Encouraging people to stand up for themselves and what they believe. That's wonderful. Preparing people for the real world. That's great too. But again, I think the motive and the method matter. And so they would use all the other good things about community and fun and friendship. And then when they had you as a captive audience, they shoved whatever message and whatever method they wanted to down your throat. And it's highly inappropriate. And at such early and impactful ages. I know 15, I thought I was pretty old and nothing was getting through that I didn't want, and I was pretty smart. But man, on top of a lifetime, an entire childhood of indoctrination, it was just little icings on the cake that took me over the edge. But enough, Brandon. Let me know what you think about this personal experience. Let me know about your personal experiences. We will get back to normal Tuesday takedowns next Tuesday, but I might do more of these fun memories. I don't know, maybe we'll do them on Fridays or Saturdays or something. Let me know if you'd like to hear more, or maybe it's just too much trauma and drama for all of you. We've all dealt with it enough. Who needs to revisit it this much? I hope it was helpful. Thanks for being here. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you Thursday for Colossians, and until then, keep thinking. I wanted to personally thank my top tiers of support: my Iconoclast, Boris, GVI, Jacob, Joe, Kitboga, Martin, Oliver, Perry, Rokkit, and Shawn; my Humanist heroes, Imposter, James, Jarrod, and Kristi; my Atheist advocates, Caleb, Jeff, Jeffrey, Karen, Maggie, Paul, Sparky, and Todd; as well as all of my secular scholar patrons. If you believe in the mission of the channel, or you just enjoy the content, please consider joining these fine people.